If you have a single predictor variable that you've measured categorically and you have a continuous outcome variable, then you might choose to use a bar chart or a column chart. Now, those words are used quite interchangeably. In fact, we usually use bar chart when we mean column chart. These use rectangular columns to display data where you've got that categorical predictor variable and continuous outcome. The bar lengths are proportional to the value that they represent, the amount of the outcome. For a column chart, the x-axis is the categories of the predictor variable. The y-axis is the amount or the value of the outcome variable. For the bar chart, the categories of the predictor variable are on the y-axis, and the values of the outcome variable are along the x-axis. So how do you decide whether you're going to use a bar chart or a column chart? You tend to want to use a bar chart if the group labels are long. That way they can be written out and you can read them from left to right. When you're creating a bar chart or a column chart, you don't want to truncate. You always want to have 0 as your baseline. And as far as the scale, the bars should take up about the middle 2/3 of the scale of your outcome variable. There should be space between the bars if they represent distinct categories, if your predictor variable was distinct categories. And the width of the bar should be about twice the width of the space between the bars. If your predictor variable was continuous, then the bars should be touching as they represent values along a continuum. With one predictor variable, all the bars should be the same color. You're representing the same outcome for just different groups of the same predictor variable. So they should be the same color and shade. They're representing the same information. When you have two predictor variables, one of the variables will have its levels laid out on the x-axis, and the other will have its levels laid out in the legend. There'll be groups of bars. They'll be grouped by those levels on the x-axis. And so you're going to shade the levels in the legend from lighter to darker as they represent different pieces of information. The combined width of the cluster of bars should be about twice the width of the space between the bars.
So how do you decide which predictor variable to put on the x-axis and which to put in the legend? Sometimes it depends on the story that you want the data to tell. Sometimes there's more of a correct answer. So if one predictor variable is a fixed quality, like gender, then put that on the x-axis and cluster the data by that. If one predictor variable is continuous or ordinal, if it has an inherent order, then that one definitely belongs on the x-axis. If we wanted to compare the mean earnings by gender and educational achievement, if we cluster the data by the levels of the variable gender, that leads the audience to compare. Within the males, here is how educational achievement influences earnings. Within the females, here's a similar pattern. However, if we want the audience to compare between the genders, then it would make more sense to lay the educational achievement out on the x-axis and to have the gender in the legend. And in this case, we can clearly see that we are comparing the difference between male and female earning powers at those different levels of educational achievement.